Hi everyone, welcome back to Your Dose, the podcast which shares stories of individuals with mental health experiences to help people feel less alone and more connected. And in this conversation, we are speaking with Jess, an award-winning mental health writer who is sharing her personal journey of overcoming bullying, struggling with body image, and battling an eating disorder. Jess started an online diary at a young age, sharing her thoughts and feelings due to her struggles with bullying at school, and never thought that this online diary would be found until one day it was, and it has since become an online space to help individuals feel less alone in their struggles. Me and Jess both had very similar experiences with food and exercise as young females, so together we know our struggles as well as our individual journeys towards recovery. We emphasise the importance of changing the narrative and focusing on strength rather than appearance, alongside the freedom we have gained through recovery to offer hope for anyone struggling. I really do hope this podcast will reach a young female struggling with an eating disorder who might be in the same place as me and Jess were in all those years ago, and be that glimmer of hope that it really can get better. Thank you so much for being here and supporting the podcast. I really do hope you enjoy the episode. And as always, please remember to leave a review if you do enjoy it so that this podcast can reach as many people as possible.
Hi Jess, welcome to the Your Dose podcast.
Hi Emily, thank you so much for having me today, this evening, whatever time it is.
Thank you for being here. Whereabouts in the world are you at the moment?
I'm in the northwest of England in a town called Preston. Of course, not as close to the sunshine as you, Emily, unfortunately.
It's not, but I have been to Preston, and one of my best friends from university lives in Preston, and she's actually there with her little boy now. And interestingly, she met her boyfriend in Australia, and then they both moved. Well, she moved back to Preston, and then they've ended up there. So maybe you know my friend actually. I may ask you that after the call. How old are you, Jess?
I'm 27. 27.
Oh my gosh, you may know my friend. We are all 27.
It's a very small world, actually, Emily. It's a very small world. It's crazy.
It is.
You can go across the world and end up bumping into somebody from your local town. It is.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
And have you been in Preston your whole life? Or have you ever been outside of Preston?
Well, I've only been in Preston about a year, just over a year with my boyfriend, and before that I lived in Cleveland, so I was right next to the seaside, 5 minutes away.
Did you go to university or anything? What's your academic background?
So I studied English communications at Lancaster University, but it was more of a remote degree, so I actually kind of did it from home.
Yeah.
But my background originally is in like creative arts and design and fashion and design. And it was when I was in college that I decided to actually move into a real job, which was writing. And that's when I kind of fell into the university degree. And I remember my first day at uni quite clear, actually. I remember sitting there and thinking, I have no paintbrushes around me, no sewing machine, no art pad and pens. It was like a notebook and a laptop, and that was it. And it was such a shock for me going from such a creative background to then something that was, I suppose, really normal. But it wasn't as creative, but I channeled my creativity through language and words and writing. And I suppose that's what's got me to where I am today with mental health.
Yeah, so I mean, so interesting. And that will go on quite nicely to what you are doing today. So what do you want to tell the listeners what you do online and social media?
Of course. So I'll give a little bit of a context. So I'm Jess. I'm an award-winning mental health awareness writer, and I'm also a content creation specialist. So my mental health writing and awareness writing is actually just kind of like a side hobby. It's something that happened very, very naturally. And my full-time job is in content creation. So I'm the head of content for a mental health brand, which is quite apt, actually, considering we're talking about that today. And I've been writing online for my entire lifetime, so since the age of 13. And it actually started out as a secret online diary that wasn't supposed to be found. It was something that was quite cathartic for me. It allowed me to switch off. It allowed me to document all of my thoughts and feelings on an online diary, because I thought if I write a written diary, someone will find it, particularly my mum and dad.
Wow.
And I didn't want them to find. My first initial struggles was with bullying at school, and I didn't want them to find out. So I thought if I write online, no one will find it. Little did I know that that isn't quite how the internet works. And yeah, one
Wow.
day, a couple of years later, after going through so much turmoil with bullying and several other different issues to do with mental health, somebody actually found it and said, Jess, you should turn this online platform into a space where people can come and connect, but also feel less alone with what they're experiencing. And I was like, absolute nonsense. I know nothing about building a business, or not even a business, an online space. I was like, this is my space. Like, I don't want to share it with anybody. But
Yeah.
then I realised that that's what I lacked. I lacked that space to go to. So I thought, maybe I do need to create that space. And it's been up and down with this online
Mm.
diary and blog for a few years, purely because of my career and the trajectory that I've been on in my career. So things I've had to prioritize my career and then jump back to the mental health side of things with my blog. But I've now created an online space that I've won a few awards for, which is crazy to even
That's
say that.
incredible. How did that feel?
It was very emotional. It was also quite invasive, but in the nicest way possible, because I thought I've created this online space and now I've won awards for sharing my journey. It was, yeah, it just made everything worthwhile. So every single struggle that I had been through,
Yeah.
little did I know that when I won the award, so I won two awards in 2019 and then 2021. So a lot has changed since then, but even then it was just at the beginning of my journey really with writing, and it spurred me on, that it definitely spurred me on to talk more about what I was going through, past and present.
That's incredible. I can't believe that you were 30. I mean, what were you writing on at 13 online?
So I had a WordPress website, which is actually the original website
Wow,
that my blog is still on now. It was just
that's
WordPress.
insane.
Yeah, I'd always
At
been very
13, you knew
intuitive.
how to set.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I was very intuitive, really. It was kind of, I just Googled online diary, and I don't know if it was SEO or whatever it was that allowed me to find it, but it was kind of a little bit like the other sites where it's like you can set up your website in 3 simple tips. It was nothing glamorous. It was not branded to what it is today. It had no colour palette or anything like that. It just had pages that I could click publish on, and that was it.
That's crazy. So, that's so interesting the way that your brain thought in that way to put it online and nobody will see it because you would have had a URL and people would have still been able to, if they've known your URL, search it. So how did the original person find it?
I actually think it was through, I can't remember if I shared it on social media, or I'm not too sure. I think they had found it because it was actually just my name. So I remember at school we used to like
Right.
Google each other's names and see who would come up in Google Images and what your images would be. And little did I know that I had to change my URL so many times to really random things that nobody could find it after that, because I was still so afraid of sharing my story with us. And I thought at that time, my bullying hadn't been exposed, so it hadn't been dealt with. It was something I was quite very much in the thick of, so I hadn't come out of school because of it. There was nothing that had been dealt with, and my parents didn't know. And that was my biggest fear, was that my parents mustn't like be able to find out about this, because everything will change. Like my life will change when they find out, because I was so isolated and alone, and I thought I'd rather just be that way because I was a natural introvert, and life was just easier being bullied in that sense, because I didn't know what it was like not to be bullied, if that makes sense.
Yeah, wow. Would you mind sharing a little bit about the bullying and, what exactly were you bullied for?
Of course. So I don't actually talk about this very often, Emily, so I'm quite glad that you've asked for me to talk about it, because usually everybody wants to know about everything else, but it all stems
No, I think
from.
it's really important. Yeah, because that's how it manifests, right?
Exactly. So I experienced bullying never in primary school. Primary school was always very smooth. Whenever anybody relates back to education, I'm always like, I loved primary school. But then in secondary education, from literally year 7, so the first year that I joined high school, was just very turbulent. I had friends initially, and I was always one of them that was there to work and work really hard. I don't know if it was because of my upbringing or because I just naturally loved to learn. But a lot of people around me didn't like that. So that was the first trigger for bullying. And then it escalated when everybody started to discover relationships and boys. And I was one of them that actually wasn't interested in talking to boys or having a relationship. It was just very, very different for me. And it just wasn't something that ever crossed my mind. So when boys did play an interest in me or talk to me, again, that was something that girls didn't like, particularly girls. And it actually stemmed from a friendship that escalated, and we'd fallen out like you all do as your hormones are kind of all over the place at high school. There's so many things that was intertwined in relationships and friendships at high school. It's so complicated. It's not as easy as what kind of my friendships are now. And it very much escalated, and it became quite a problem. And a lot of the time, I remember this one very, very vivid point where I was in a science class, and it was actually a boy that threw a piece of glue in the back of my hair, and I had to have it cut out the back of my hair because he'd thrown it into the back of it and I couldn't get it out. And I remember everybody laughing, and I still remember it to this day, how bright and red my skin went. I could almost feel my skin pulsating from the embarrassment. It was like, oh my goodness, I was like, oh my God, I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. But there was many, many cases of that where they would wait outside my class for me, or people would threaten to jump me outside school. And it would be a lot of girls that weren't actually necessarily at my school. And that was where this kind of online platform of MSN came in, and kind of the online bullying as well. Cyberbullying was something I was very much exposed to. And I didn't know how to navigate friendships and relationships. Like, I'm happy to put my hand up and say I didn't know how to navigate it at all. And probably the way that I reacted probably wouldn't be the same as how I would react now. But then in year 10, so many years later, after not admitting that I was being bullied, my parents asked me what I was doing one lunchtime, and I slipped up and said that I was eating my lunch in the toilets. And they knew that, again, that was an instant trigger and wanted to know why I was in the bathroom eating my lunch. And then after that, my life pretty much changed. And I was removed from school because my high school at the time did nothing about the bullying. It just began to get worse. So I was removed from the high school, and I was homeschooled until the end of my high school secondary experience.
Wow. That must have been so difficult. It's kind of weird when you were talking about that, because certain elements really resonated with me. Like, I wouldn't say that I was definitely bullied, because I'm small. But I always had friends, but there was girls at school that were just out to get me. And yeah, I've been threatened a few times, and whether that be both in or out the school. And I remember going into school and just being absolutely terrified. I don't know if you were the same, but I'd be going in and I'd be like, how can I avoid these people that literally want to beat me up? Like, that's like my everyday at school was either being chased or shouted at. And I never really understood why or what I'd done.
Yeah, I was exactly the same. Mine was actually not directly related to my height, but also my hair. So my hair was very, very long. It's still very, very long now.
Yeah.
It's taken me years to grow it back because I actually cut it to shoulder length out of bullying, because somebody said, you'd look nice with short hair. And I didn't realise the kind of concept behind why they wanted me to cut my hair off. So my hair now is a bit more of like a safety net for me in the strangest way. But when people are like, wow, you've got such long hair, I'm thinking, yeah, it's taken a long time for me to grow this back since high school. But I can completely relate, Emily, to how you felt. I didn't realise that the kind of excessive sweating and tummy ache all of the time and needing to go to the toilet and biting my nails and picking the skin around my nails was actually directly related to all of that as well, and feeling that constant anxiety and that stomach churning anxiety. You almost like, never mind facing school, you don't want to face the next breath or the next moment. And it was a very, very challenging moment in my life, but I am actually grateful for it, because I wouldn't be where I am, I wouldn't be where I'm documenting my journey online, and I wouldn't be in the profession that I'm in now.
Yeah. I think that's such an incredible way to look at it, and I think all of the things that I've been through as well, I try and have that perspective. I 100% think it makes you a stronger person, and you know, you do become more thick-skinned, which is such a shame that it takes things like that to make you thick-skinned, but it does, and you grow as a person if you've had these experiences. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about the homeschooling, because you said you were in year 10 when you got removed from school. So you would have finished your final year of secondary school at, is that right? In homeschooling.
Yes.
And
So,
how was that being homeschooled?
I mean, that was the first time that I decided I never want to work in an office. I always want to. So for me, like remote working was then. It wasn't during COVID. It was then. It was the first kind of feeling of, wow, like this actually works. And although I was so lonely, I was so isolated, I was very, very privileged, I must say, to have an incredible family network, and that was all I did have, was a family network. And I know that for some people they don't have that, but homeschooling was definitely made more comfortable and a lot easier. And I'm saying easier in a hesitating way because it certainly wasn't easy, but my parents actually paid some of the high school teachers to teach me outside of hours, and some of the teachers
Wow.
were actually quite accommodating, to come and teach me at home. At first it wasn't that case at all. I took a long time off sick, and then my dad of course explained to them, you know, Jess is really struggling with her mental health and social isolation, and you know, anxiety was the biggest thing, in depression. But I managed to study at home. I did my exams in a college, so I went to a college environment and I had all the same processes like everybody else would. I just wasn't surrounded by everybody. I was on my own, so I still had to go through all the procedures. And I came out of school, I think it was 11 A stars. I had to drop a few
Wow.
subjects purely because of my mental health. I couldn't completely complete everything. So for instance, maths, I actually have dyscalculia, so I really struggle with numbers. That was something I had to drop, and just really hone in on the things that I was really good at,
That
so
you were
that I
good at.
knew. Yeah.
And did you have any friends in the process of this at school?
I had one very close friend, which she was from a different school, but also I can't quite remember. I was quite close to her. I remember being really close to her, but she didn't quite know the dynamic of everything that was going at school. It was so difficult to navigate friendships and relationships looking back, that I wish I could kind of do things differently. But also, everything is mapped out the way it's supposed to. You know, we always say that everything is supposed to happen for a reason. But yeah, I did have, but mainly my main support network was definitely my parents and my siblings, and of course my wonderful nana, who's now 94, and my auntie. You know, they were always there.
Oh, that's amazing. I think that, yeah, the family unit or just any sort of support system is so important. And I look back at my school years and the friendships that I had, and for me they were always very difficult. I think they were very difficult because I was, you know, pretty mentally unwell at points. So struggle with my mental health throughout school. And yeah, that is difficult to navigate, because how can you expect a 14, 15-year-old to understand mental health when they've never experienced it? And back then, when we were at school, mental health wasn't spoken about either. So the way that we would have been behaving may have seemed odd, or, you know, attention seeking. And all females have their own hormones and issues going on as well. So to think that they would be able to support you at the same time is probably unrealistic. So I barely have any friends from high school, actually. I know what they're doing, and, you know, I would say hello to them in the street if I saw them. But a lot of my real true friends were actually made at university, when I'd come out of my mental health issues and grown a bit more as a person, which I guess maybe is similar to what happened to you.
Very similar, but also at university. So when I studied English, I was with a lot more mature students, So students that were already very much established in their careers and they were doing further study and also had like families and they were married and they were much, much older than me. So I was actually studying with people that were in like their 40s and 50s. And I was I was like 21 when I was studying my degree. So it was very different. It was a different dynamic. So I didn't have that usual university experience. It was kind of very, very different. I did jump straight from college into university, so I didn't really have a break. It was high school, college, then uni. And again, I was quite socially isolated. I've always been a little bit of an introvert, but naturally being quite a lonely person as well. And I've always fully accepted that I am actually quite a lonely individual. Not so much now in my life, but more because of the fear of letting people in, and particularly friendships at that stage, because I was so tainted from the past and so damaged. I didn't want to then let any other new friendships in. It was like, if I stay on my own, I can figure this out and I'll stay safe.
It's easier. Yeah. So on your Instagram, you speak a lot about body image, and that seems to be something that's quite relevant throughout. What exactly happened for you to be so open and push this positive body image message to your followers?
So it actually started out not really as a body image. It wasn't really much of trying to share. I know now it kind of looks like I'm talking about my previous body image and kind of really conquering all the troubles that I've gone through with orthorexia and things like that. But now, when I look back, actually what it was is I was actually just documenting my health and fitness journey online. And what I didn't realise, and very naively was doing it, was that what I was actually posting online was quite damaging for myself, but also for others, because what was actually going on wasn't really what was being portrayed. So I was really struggling with my eating, my exercise addiction, and I was sharing all that online, but from a different lens. So I was saying, I'm going to the gym twice a day, and this is what I eat in a day. But actually, it wasn't what I was eating in a day at all. It was all false. It was all false. And now, when I look back, it's only now I can reflect on it and think, wow, you had like some real issues and challenges that you were facing, and nobody knew that, because people would comment like, wow, Jess, you're in such good shape, like you can see your six-pack, you look incredible. But that wasn't the case at all.
Wow. And were you doing that on Instagram?
Yeah, that's how I really started to grow my following, believe it or not, was through sharing pictures of my body, sharing food. A lot of it was all to do with food. And you'd only have to share like the odd image and you would get lots of followers and lots of likes and comments and engagement. And what I was doing wasn't necessarily toxic, but if it was to be done now, it wouldn't be okay. And I think it's because now the world of internet has completely changed. But yeah, between the ages of 18 to 22, I was battling with an eating disorder. Nobody knew about it apart from, I suppose, the close ones that were beside me, especially my mum and a few close friends.
That's so interesting. And I really respect that you were open and honest about that, because social media is literally a highlight reel, and the amount of fitness influencers over the years that have shared, images and pictures of food that they most likely have not eaten, and portrayed this image that they eat at McDonald's all the time, or they they barely exercise and they've got this like amazing figure, and actually in reality they're probably exercising very regularly, probably addicted, and also really limiting their calories. And there's actually a few influencers that I can think of when I was also struggling with my body image over the years, where I've just had to unfollow them, because I've kind of been able to gauge that it wasn't real. Like, I knew that it was impossible, unless you genetics, which do come into it, for them to have a figure like that, but then also be eating what they say they were eating on social media. So the fact that you've been honest about that, I think, is really important, because it just highlights that there are probably so many other influencers online that are doing that and or have done that or still doing that.
Oh my goodness. I used to take pictures of my mum's food. I would never share pictures of mine. And then when people would be like, wow, that looks beautiful and delicious, I'd be like, yeah, I know it. I know it does. But I'm not eating it because I'm too scared. Too scared to eat it. I'll eat the smaller portion that doesn't have the potatoes or the chips or the rice on the side
Yeah.
because I'll bump it up with some volume, which people use. Volume, I'll have some salad and I might have some grated courgette, dare I say it, and, you know,
Yeah.
some other, you know, vegetables that I really enjoy now, but it was from such a different place then. And the fear of food,
Yeah.
nobody ever saw that on my social media. And I know some people have probably been quite intuitive. So, like what you've just said, Emily, about, you know, you kind of, now I know exactly, or I kind of have a bit of an inkling of those on social
You
media.
do,
So I just
yeah.
simply won't follow them, simply won't.
Yeah. Yeah. And when did your parents start to realize that this was more than just being healthy and exercising and watching what she eats?
So, alongside my eating disorder, I really struggled with depression and suicidal ideation. It was something that was, it's always been a bit of a constant in my life. Now I'm just very, very good at handling it. It's still up and down. Same with like the eating disorder thoughts, it never truly goes away. But it was probably around the age of about 19 when I was really struggling with a doubt of depression, so much so that I couldn't get out of bed. I was crying all of the time. Of course, food restriction was just part of my life, so that wasn't something that was new to my parents. And anxiety was something really difficult that was very, very prominent in my life. But even just like the basic things like brushing my hair, brushing my teeth, making my bed, having a wash were becoming increasingly difficult. So my parents actually took me, it was actually my mum, because my dad used to train with me in the gym. And he, even to this day, he said he wasn't completely aware what was truly going on because he was so close to me. And it was my mum that knew the entire time that something deeper was going on, and she took me to the doctors. And I remember this moment so prevalently in my life because it was such a turning point for me. And I remember the doctor sat me down and she, you know, as they usually do, kind of say, Jess, what's going on for you, what are you experiencing? And then she measured me, and then she said, she did my BMI and my bloods and lots of things like that. And then she said, Jess, and I was like, yeah. She was like, do you ever want to be a mother? Do you ever want to have children? And I was like, oh gosh, yeah. I was like, absolutely I do. It like all of a sudden took me out of that space that I was in because it was such a random question, unrelated to what was going on. And I thought, yeah, I
Yeah.
do want to be a mum. And she said, well, what you're going through now, she says, needs to stop. And we need to get you onto the next steps of recovery, because if you continue on with what you're doing, you won't be able to become a mum. And it was something that, although people may listen to this and think, wow, that's scaremongering, to me, it was a pivotal moment in my life that made me really resonate with what she was saying, because it touched on something that was something so close to my heart. Because at the time, I had actually lost my period for over 12 months. So it was something that, you
Yeah.
know, I'd lost my menstrual cycle. It was a big part of my life that I had lost. Although part of me
Yeah.
was quite relieved because my periods were horrific, there was also a part of me that made me feel less connected to my body, even more like less connected than I already was. So for her to then say that was a big turning point for my mum as well. I remember my mum tearing up next to me, thinking like, what on earth is going on? And that's when I knew that things had to change. They had to change. I didn't know how I was going to get on that next step to recovery, but I knew it needed to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting when you're saying this, and I'm sat here like smiling in a weird way, just because it's like it's so nice to hear someone who had kind of a similar experience, and was able to like use that as motivation to pull you through, because unfortunately a lot of people with eating disorders don't have that motivation, and people get so far into an eating disorder that they don't care whether they have children. They actually don't care whether they die, you know, because they're
Yeah.
so wrapped up in anorexia or bulimia or whatever it is, that they really lose sense of reality. And I'm really grateful that for me it was a similar thing as well. I'd also lost my period for over a year, and but my hair was falling out. I don't know if your hair fell out, but my hair was falling out like it was it was fine for probably, like, everything seems to be fine for probably about 8 months of like this, of like, you know, where it was getting from being a normal healthy weight to really deteriorating over 8 months. I think it takes a while for your body to adjust to what's happening, for then things to start showing physically. And that was when my hair started falling out a lot. And someone coming up to me at school, it was after the holidays, like the 6 weeks holidays, and I just spent the whole holiday, just the whole of the 6 weeks holidays, just running all the time. So like I'd come back after 6 weeks, and I think when you're already losing weight, sometimes it can just take another 6 weeks to make all of the difference. And one of the teachers came up to me and was like, "Emily, are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why?" And she asked me if I was actually going through chemotherapy. And I think it was that moment that was quite pivotal for me. I actually ended up getting referred through the school because I was on such a waiting list, and a few things happened at school to the point where they were like, "Right, Emily, you need to get help immediately." But knowing that people were seeing me as anorexic for the first time was like, wow, I don't want to be known as Emily with anorexia. It was weird. And that was the pivotal moment for me where I really just wanted to get better.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible, Emily. I can relate to the hair loss, but mine was actually when I started to recover. So I then started to notice that I developed eczema, which was really bizarre because I'd never really struggled with my skin. I had teeth problems, and hair loss. Hair loss was a big thing, and it's still something I'm battling with all the time now. I felt like a few years after kind of recovery, it was almost like my body had started to relax, and that's when things caught up with me.
Yeah, it's interesting how it manifests. And I had eczema actually, and then I had like the really like downy hair on your skin, like, you know, on your skin obviously, the downy hair that just grows in like really random places, which is obviously your body's response to try and keep you warm. And yeah, just being absolutely freezing all of the time. And it's crazy when you're in this headspace because you just get so lost in it that you really don't recognize what's going on. And I think it's interesting when you mentioned about your dad, because my mum was very much the same. So my mum was a big runner, and we used to go out running a lot. And at first it was like, oh, Emily's running. I never ever used to exercise. So they were probably seeing this as a really healthy behavior. Like, finally, Emily's actually doing some exercise and not eating McDonald's. And she probably enjoyed it because it was like a thing that we could do together. And I don't think you recognise your child changing in front of you when it's happening, if that makes any sense at all. And I think from a parent's perspective, the way that I look at it now is that she was probably trying to ignore it because she didn't want to accept that this was actually happening. Do you think that was a similar thing for your dad?
100%. I think my dad probably won't knock me for saying this, but yeah, it's more that avoidance. He didn't want to see his little girl struggling. He knew that something was going on, but he didn't even want to acknowledge it. In case, I think with my dad, it was always he didn't want to say the wrong thing or push me a little bit too far over the edge, because at that time I was very short-tempered. So because of I suppose lack of nutrients, I was very short-tempered. I cried at the drop of a hat. It was, I was living on my nerves. I was stepping on eggshells all of the time in my own life for no reason whatsoever other than because of malnutrition and exhaustion, like complete body exhaustion. So yeah, it was exactly the same for my dad. It was something we did to bond together. The gym was something that we did every single morning at I used to get him up at 5 a.m. And I remember I wouldn't eat anything before the gym, and if I did, it would be like dry chicken before the gym, because I thought, no, I have to fast. And he would do exactly the same, but my dad had,
oh my gosh,
nothing. Yeah, it was crazy.
That's honestly, Jess, I feel like That's so weird because that's exactly the same as me and my mum. And yeah, we'd always go, we'd wake up and I'd get her up at like, yeah, similar time in the morning. It'd be freezing and we'd be going for a run together. And then we'd always come back and have breakfast. And I guess, yeah, my mum would always, looking back, have something a bit more substantial than I would have. But she was definitely completely, I think avoiding would be fair to say. And, you know, it must be so difficult for parents to watch their child go through that. And I do look back at my parents throughout the whole journey, and it was really, really obviously difficult for me. But it must have been so much more difficult for my parents at times. And I don't think that they probably got the support that they needed, because mental health wasn't spoken about in their generation. You know, for my dad, it was like, what? My daughter's got an eating disorder. Like, that's not happening. But that's his way of responding, because all he knows about eating disorders from his perspective was that people get eating disorders and they die. That's genuinely what he believed. He didn't know that there was that you could recover. So when he first found out, he was very dismissive of it. And still now, it's something that I think my dad struggles to talk about. But I do think there should be more support for parents. I mean, that kind of, I suppose, leads on to a question around treatment and how did you actually end up starting your recovery journey?
I can't quite remember completely because my life was such a blur during that time. I don't know if you found that, was that brain fog. It was
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
bad. I was sleeping all of the time because I was so tired, and I was sleeping to
Yeah.
skip meal times because at that time I was studying at uni. I didn't really have a job. I was just a student. So for me, recovery, I actually ended up going private. So again, I was referred down the usual channels, but had no success with waiting times and waiting lists. And I had
Yeah.
a bit of savings. I had some savings that I had saved up. I believe it was, I can't quite remember what the savings were from, whether it was from like birthdays and things like that. And I actually spent the savings on hypnotherapy. So that was something that I used to have it every single morning at 5 a.m. and I paid for it for a 6-month block. So it was almost like a crash course in hypnotherapy. And the therapist that I had it with, I still occasionally see her now. I actually went back to her last year and then did a bit of course of hypnotherapy with her again for some, not the same issues, but some other things that were going on. And yeah, hypnotherapy was something that was completely life-changing for me, but also being around a community. So a community in the sense of my family and speaking to my friends about it was something I was incredibly ashamed about, because on social media I was talking about everything was okay. So for me, that was a big shock to my system to actually admit, actually, I do have a problem and I do actually need help. And the thing is, you don't
Yeah.
always have to reach crisis point to reach out for help. And I think I waited a little bit too long to finally reach out for help. If I could go back, I'd probably have reached out for help a little bit sooner. But these things are always that way. So yeah, for me, it was hypnotherapy, sense of community, and at that time utilizing social media and writing as an outlet for me. But it was very, very
Yeah.
difficult, the recovery journey. It was very, very up and down.
How long do you think I mean, you might be with me on this. I don't think that you ever fully recover, in all honesty. In my opinion, you can recover and you can live a normal life. But I think an eating disorder is so consuming at the time that there will always be things that stay in your life. It's just more so how you manage it. Like, for example, this is really weird, but one of the things that I used to do, which I stopped doing now, but my parents used to point out on this after, and even friends and like my boyfriends would be like, "Why are you doing that?" But I used to like bang my hip bones. So one of the things that I really wanted was to have can't get my words out, protruding hip bones, because that's what you'd see when you'd be on like all these on the social media or in the magazines, like all the models would have really protruding hip bones. And I literally aspired for that. Like when, like there was always things in my eating disorder journey that I kind of wanted. It'd be like get a certain weight, then it was like hip bones, and it was like ribs and all those sorts of things. But even like up until like a few years ago, bearing in mind I had my eating disorder at 15 and I'm now 28 this year, I was still doing those habits of like banging my hip bones to see if they were there. Even though I didn't care about it, it'd become a habit. So I guess where I'm going with that is I do believe there are things that unfortunately stay with you. But it's more so getting to a place where you have a healthy relationship with food and exercise. So when do you think that was for you?
I think what you said is absolutely spot on, Emily. And I always say that when somebody asks me about like my recovery journey. So like, when did you recover? And like, is life normal now? But it is true. When you've been through an eating disorder, you don't fully recover from it. You just get used to those thoughts and you get better at coping with it. It never truly goes away. And for me, it's always been when I've been recovering or when things crop up for me, it's usually during a turbulent time that I feel out of control of. So an eating disorder was this element of control. It allowed me to feel in control when everything else was crumbling beneath me. So whether a lot of it was triggered by relationships. So if I was in a turbulent relationship at the time and I was going through a breakup, it would always be food and exercise were the things that I would latch onto. Same with if my parents had an argument or my nana was sick in hospital, it was always something that I'd be like, right, food and exercise. And although exercise and eating well is incredible for your mental health, this was quite the opposite. I'm not too sure if I've answered your question correctly there, Emily, because I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent. But
No, you have. You've definitely answered it. And I think what you said is really interesting because I was going to ask you your triggers, and that was one of my questions, but it was the same for me. And actually, full transparency, and I always want to be honest on these podcasts, there are still times, you know, moving to Australia in particular was a huge change in my life. And I definitely was nowhere near what I would have been in the past when relationships had broken up, and I've relapsed a few times, definitely throughout university. It was nowhere near as bad, which to me is just such a win. But it is still something that I will go back to, and when I'm really stressed, all of a sudden, and I think this is also kind of normal as well, which it shouldn't be, but I think a lot of people will have these feelings whether they have an eating disorder or have ever had an eating disorder or not. But I definitely feel like my body becomes a lot more at the forefront of my mind. I'm more aware of maybe the size of my thighs or like how my stomach feels when I'm sat down, and then become more aware of, am I exercising enough? Oh, I've not, and a bit more obsessive. For me, it was always more of an obsession around exercise than it was food. I think food was just like, was something that more so came after the exercise. Mine was definitely an exercise addiction. So yeah, and in response to what you're saying, there are still times when life happens and there are struggles, and I will still to this day turn to exercise in particular as a way of control.
Yeah, I can completely relate. Even just recently, I've been struggling at work with workload and stresses and lots of other things going on in my personal life and health challenges.
Yeah.
And food is something that now my coping mechanisms are much easier. So I'll talk to my boyfriend if I'm having a bit of a wobble around food, or he tends to be actually very good at noticing it without actually me having to say anything. He notices if I'm being
That's
a little
amazing.
bit awkward around food, or I'm analysing food, because I don't even have to talk about it. He can always sense what's going on because he can watch my body language. It can be quite obvious sometimes. But there's also that element of, now I try to really be quite mindful, and I try to use that word strategically because I know it can be thrown around. but I try to be quite mindful with how I approach food now, and especially during those moments where I'm struggling, and very much like what you said, Emily, where you think, gosh, relapsing, but actually it's just a wobble, it's just a hiccup, and it'll all smooth over just like it did before. And that's the moments where I have to be really, really kind and gentle with myself. Whereas previously I may have been like, come on, Jess, pull it together. Like, how ridiculous is this? Whereas now it's more about like kind of seeking help. So as soon as I feel that way, I have to talk to my boyfriend. It tends to be my boyfriend because he's within close proximity of me of all the time. And there's kind of no barriers there of communication. I can talk to him quite freely. And I then also remember, there's something that I always remembered seeing this quote, that your body is the house that you live in, so you should always make it a nice place to be. And I always think about that.
So
and I always
lovely.
think about my future, and I think about my longevity, and I think my organs and my insides, absolutely everything that keeps us moving day to day and keeps our brain functioning, that's the house that I'm living in. I should make it absolutely lovely to be there, kind of mind, body and spirit. And that doesn't mean going to the gym every single day and having a six pack. It means whatever makes me feel at home in my own body.
That's so beautiful. I really love that. And I think one of the biggest things around that whole making your body a lovely place to be is it's the way that we speak to ourselves. I think that we forget how important that is. And something that I've become really aware of, which I would never have been aware of before, is looking at myself in the mirror, which I don't know for you, but that was something that I couldn't do for years. I actually had to hide mirrors around my house because I couldn't possibly look at myself naked. And I get ready and I look at myself in the mirror now. And as soon as a thought comes in my head where I'm like thinking about a certain part of my body, I'm like, stop. You are beautiful. Like, you are amazing. Like, think about what your body has done for you. My body allows me to be something that I've been taking up recently is CrossFit. And so with CrossFit, you've got to be eating a lot of food, and it's very much focused on strength and conditioning and endurance as well. So if I don't eat enough, then I'm going to go to those sessions and I'm going to be weak, and that's embarrassing. It is embarrassing. Like the first time I got there, and I know when I'm not eating enough for sessions, and I'm like, it actually irritates me, which is such a long way off where I used to be, where I'd be thinking about how can I eat as little as possible before going to the gym, because then I can burn as many calories as possible, and then I won't have to eat as much for the rest of the day, and I'm just going to get skinnier and skinnier. Whereas now my focus is on how can I eat as much as possible to be as strong as possible. And that's really what I see when I personally look in the mirror, is like, wow, my legs, they're not big, they're strong. And my strong legs allow me to be really powerful at squats. And there's lots of people in the gym who look at me and they're like, God, you can squat a lot. And like, that's great. And I can squat a lot because I'm lower to gravity, which is great, because of my height, which is another great thing. But no, my legs aren't big, they're just strong. And I think really changing the narrative and focusing on what your body can give you, rather than maybe what you're lacking, if that makes any sense. Like, I'll never ever be tall and skinny and lanky. Skinny is the wrong word, but I'll never be tall and model looking. Like, that was never. I never ever will have that figure, and I was always aspiring for that. I think I was always trying to control my eating because I couldn't control my height. I couldn't control that. I will never look like all of my friends looked at school, but that's okay, because there's lots of other things that my body can give me with the shape that I do have. Got on a bit of a tangent there, and I don't know if that's made any sense, and I don't know if that's something that you try to incorporate as well.
Absolutely. My perception on fitness has completely changed. I probably changed around about a year ago when I actually experienced a really bad back injury for the second time. And I was falling back into this trap of exercising all of the time on minimal sleep. My nutrition wasn't great. I was hyper stressed at work because of me now stepping into like a fully fledged career now. I'm really on that trajectory in my career, so that has to take priority for me. But my perception on fitness completely changed. It was nothing to do with me having the eating disorder as such. It was more having actually a back injury, and I physically couldn't move, so I was really not in control. I couldn't go to the gym. I couldn't, I could maybe control my food, but I was in so much pain with my back. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything, and it made me really change my perspective on fitness. And I think if I hadn't have had that back injury a year ago, I would probably still be training in the gym quite consistently, feeling pressured to lift weights and lift heavy. Because for me, I used to love weights training, but for me it was, again, that element of control. It felt like I had to do it because of societal norms on social media. It was something that everybody's been doing. All of the athletes for certain fitness brands, they all lift weights. I have to look like that because I have to uphold this image online. That's what used to get me all the engagement and the likes and the comments, was me in a sports bra and leggings and training in the gym. But actually, after the back injury, my fitness has completely changed. I'm not as fit as I used to be, but my actual fitness has changed in the sense of how I look at how I move my body. So I've started martial arts for a self-defense perspective. So
amazing.
For me, that's something that I do with my dad. He's been teaching it for decades and decades. So now I actually attend his classes, and I still weight train, but I weight train for functionality. So being able to actually function properly, so be able to pick up the shopping bags, be able to go on hikes at the weekend with my boyfriend, and just feel stronger, as opposed to, right, I've got to train legs today because I need to grow my glutes because X, Y, and Z person online follows this workout program and they look like this, and I need to look like that. For me, it's completely changed. For me, it's about longevity, about actually enjoying exercise, because if I don't enjoy it, I won't do it. Like, I won't do it anymore. I won't force myself to do it. I'm quite stubborn in that sense now, if I don't enjoy it, that's it. I'm not going. And it is difficult. Exercise is difficult. Getting up early is difficult. But for me, now I'm in my career, and I'm in a career that I really, really enjoy. It is all about focus. It allows me to focus. So if I exercise in the morning, I know I'll be more productive at work. So it is more for my mind and focus as well.
Yeah, no, you've literally just like spoken to me and my brain so much, like with all of that. I think one thing that I used to force myself to do was running. And you know what? I hate it. I really hate it. And I know I should probably do it more because I'd maybe get better at it. But I never ever attend a CrossFit session and think, I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. I love it. It's a team sport. I feel incredible after. I feel probably like I'm about to die every time I'm doing it, but not in a bad way, not in a this is awful, I want this to end, but more in a challenging way. And yeah, it's so much less about, why don't I do this really isolated move that, like you said, is going to grow my glutes, so my glutes look like ex social media influencer, and looking at all these social media influencers and thinking, why does my body look like that? But everybody is completely different. And I think that's something that I've definitely come to accept, is that I will never ever naturally have a really toned stomach unless I am absolutely like, counting my calories and really restricting myself. I will never have that. And that's okay. And I don't really care about that anymore. And I think the right people and it will just accept you for who you are, and the fact that you have a boyfriend who sounds so supportive. And I want to ask you a question on that, actually, as one of my few final questions. Your boyfriend won't care what you look like, and also the people who really care about you don't care about what you look like. So yes, it's important to stay fit and healthy and look after your body, but I think constantly trying to work towards these unrealistic standards will never make you happy. At some point, you have to accept that this is who I am. This is my body shape at a healthy weight. And I'm just going to love myself for exactly who I am. And I'm going to love my body for all the amazing things that it does to me. does to me, does for me. But I wanted to ask you a quick question on your boyfriend. So I know I have lots of female listeners, but I also get some male listeners every now and again who are looking for what I've noticed to educate themselves because they have a partner who is struggling with mental health issues. So what do you think it is that your boyfriend does for you when you are having those low body image days, or you're struggling a little bit with your mental health? What do you think he does that really helps you?
So, to put things into perspective, I met my boyfriend about 8 or 9 years ago, and he was actually my first ever personal trainer. And then we've kind of rekindled. We rekindled about a year and a half ago. We'd always kept in touch, but he was always a personal trainer. Nothing more, nothing less, always a personal trainer. So, naturally, he was fairly aware of eating disorders and the parameters around body image and food. But I also think that you don't have to be an expert to help somebody and to help somebody out and to be there for somebody. So although he has that background and that training, he's not an expert in eating disorders or body image, although he's a personal trainer and online coach. So for me, the biggest thing being around Dan is the fact that he celebrates food freedom. So he loves cooking. He absolutely loves cooking. He's an amazing cook, but he absolutely loves it as well. And for me to see how much love and joy that he puts into cooking allows me to really enjoy it. It helps that he's a very good cook as well, and the food is absolutely delicious. But it is that food freedom, how excited he gets around food. For me, it allows me to feel, it allows me to celebrate it with him. It's a moment where we can socialise and talk and enjoy food. And my relationship with food in the past year has completely transformed, and I believe it's because I'm in a space that I can completely be myself. I can tap into my inner child. He will be his inner child with me, but it is that element of celebrating food, the constant reassurance that he gives me that, everything is going to be okay. And also, he avoids discussing weight, food, shape, and diets. That's something that, although he's a personal trainer and he talks about his clients, or he may say, somebody's done this, it's amazing, and he shares it on social media, we do try and avoid that, in particular when I'm struggling, because it's something that, even now, if it's not related to me and it's related to somebody else, could also be a trigger. So, definitely the kind of, I suppose, being careful around the language that you use, and then celebrating food freedom. So if you enjoy food, don't be afraid to celebrate it around somebody that finds it quite difficult to navigate.
Yeah, I really love that. And I think it's something that is so, so important for somebody who's struggled with their eating or is struggling with your eating. Your boyfriend or partner is someone that you spend an incredible amount of time with, and the way that they approach food and exercise is obviously going to influence massively the way that you approach food and exercise. And I actually dated a guy, I've actually dated a guy in the past, and he had a very unhealthy relationship with food and exercise. And I think it was one of the big reasons why the relationship ended, because I think I kind of resented him in the end for like the way that it made me feel, which probably, underlying I still maybe had issues. But I think for me, something that I do look for in a partner is somebody who does have a healthy relationship with food and exercise. And that doesn't mean that they can't, look good and go to the gym and have abs. It's not about that, but it's more a case of being balance, I think, rather than being really restrictive. Because if somebody's really restrictive with food, it makes me feel like I have to be restrictive with food. No matter how far I've come with my eating disorder journey, I will think that will be something that I will struggle with. And I'm very easy to assume that that's something that I should be doing, if that makes sense. And I think that's why, for me, one of the biggest things that has really helped me on my recovery is to unfollow any accounts on social media which make me feel like I should be a certain way. Like, I will only follow body image accounts that are promoting positive body image. That doesn't mean that they can't be fitness influencers. It just means that they are fitness influencers who aren't constantly talking about eating chicken and rice and X amount of calories a day and doing this amount of exercise a day, like, you know, that's great for some people, and I think that these fitness influencers have a place, but for me, they are people that I just absolutely cannot follow without feeling triggered.
I agree. The social media landscape and just your digital landscape in general for me is something that I'm very meticulous about now, and very much like you, Emily, is every single month I go through who I'm following, and that is across all different networks and channels that I engage on. And I make sure that I go through and unfollow, or if it is actually friends, because sometimes it can be your nearest and dearest that actually trigger you or frustrate you or
Yeah.
set you back on that trajectory to thinking a certain way. I actually mute them, so you can mute them on Instagram now. And they may not even be close friends, they might just be acquaintances that you don't necessarily want to unfollow, but you want to mute them. And that's actually okay as well. I think there is this element of,
Yeah.
you know, we have to be engaging with everybody, but actually, no, we can set boundaries. And boundary setting is such a big thing that I've done on social media. But you talking about your previous partner, I mean, with Dan, he's training for an ultra marathon, he's running all of the time, he's always in the gym, he is always swimming, he's always exercising. For him, that's something that he does to manage his mental health. And if I was in a very, very different situation, I probably would have had a bit of a comparison to it and think, gosh, I don't move half as much as he does. But it is that element, like you said previously, Emily, of I actually became quite happy with where I was at in my journey. I actually didn't want a partner when Dan came into my life. I was very happy on my own. I'd got to a really level space and balanced space where I was really starting to accept my body and what it was doing for me. So very much like you said, Emily, about your legs and being strong. I had reached that point. I'd reached that point where I was like, oh my God, thank God for that. I finally reached a point where I'm happy. I don't want a partner. I don't need validation from anybody else. And that's when it all changed. So not to say that it would change that when you reach that space, but it is that element of, I think I'd probably be very different with Dan if I hadn't reached that journey on my own.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can think about, if anyone's listening to this right now and is thinking about recovering or thinking about what would life be like if I didn't have an eating disorder, what do you think, and this is quite a hard question, what do you think is one of the biggest things that you've gained out of recovery?
That is a difficult question, but for me, the only word that springs to mind is freedom. And I mean that in...
That is the same as mine. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it almost like brings you to tears saying that word, because when you've been so consumed by something, and I suppose that's with any mental illness, when it consumes you or you live with it every single day, sometimes all you want is that breathing space for freedom. And for me now, when I eat, it might be a donut, it might be a cake, it might be a big bowl of noodles, when I've, even now, I'm like, oh my goodness, that feels so good. And it is that element of freedom, being able to go out with friends and not avoid those social plans, and being able to talk about food and not being frightened of it, being able to actually cook food and eat it and snapshot food on my camera and actually share that this is exactly what I'm eating right now. It is that element of freedom in just so many different ways. Like even something as simple, if I don't want to go to the gym and I just want to have a lie-in and then have a bowl of cereal instead of avocado on toast, I can do that, and it feels absolutely incredible in that moment. So for me, 100%, it's freedom.
Like I felt that, and it like it makes me also feel really emotional, because you saying it is just makes you, I guess you never really consider how far you've actually come when, you know, you just kind of, one day you've got an eating disorder and the next day you're absolutely fine around food, but you forget how much control it actually had on your life. And when I asked you that question, I was thinking, for me, it's freedom, because you have lived under the constraints of an eating disorder for so long, of counting calories, avoiding social situations, going for runs when you don't want to. And so it's like the really, really small things which so many people do on a daily basis, like just having a bowl of cereal and not going to the gym if you don't feel like it, or having a week off the gym because you can, and you're not going to gain weight because you've had a week off the gym. That is such a small thing that so many people would maybe just be like, but that's just normal. But it takes such a long time to get there. And yeah, I think it is the most liberating feeling to know that, wow, I am in control of my thoughts and feelings. And I have managed to get to a place in my life where it just doesn't matter anymore. And it's freedom is definitely, I think, one of the best ways to possibly put that. But coming to the end of the podcast, Jess, I've absolutely loved speaking to you, honestly. I feel like it's very rare that you speak to people where I feel like you have very similar experiences. And I think we had a very similar experience with our body image and the way that it manifested and stuff like that. So I found this quite therapeutic, to be honest. But if there is somebody listening to this right now who is struggling with an eating disorder or body image issues, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give them?
So I'm probably going to try and wrap it into one, but one is that's just cropped up now was because we've had this conversation and you've just said to me, Emily, that you related to what I'd been through. So one of them is, you can see it and you can listen to it directly now, is that you're not alone. Because me and Emily, I never knew that, Emily, about your background or anything like that. So it just goes to show that no matter what we're experiencing day to day and how isolated we may feel, and at breaking point, you're actually never, ever alone. Whether it's one person or 50 people or 100 people that are experiencing the same or thousands, you're never truly alone, no matter how isolated you feel. And there's always help out there. And another thing that I still remember to this day, and you may have heard of this already for whoever's listening, is if you wouldn't ever say it to a friend and you would never advise a friend to do it, then don't be doing it yourself and don't be saying it to yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I think what's so incredible about this conversation, Jess, is that we're both 27-year-olds. And it's not completely, I'm not saying that males don't go through eating disorders, because they do. And I've had some incredible men come and talk about their eating issues on my podcast. But we're two 27-year-old females, and a big following of mine are females. And I'm sure that a lot of them struggle with body image issues. Maybe some of them are struggling with an eating disorder right now. And we are living proof that it does get better. And I just hope that we can serve as role models to any young or old women, it doesn't matter what age you are, that are listening to this right now, to show that it doesn't have to be like that. That doesn't have to be your life, and you can find freedom, and it absolutely will get better. So thank you for being on here and talking to me today and having this conversation, because I think that I've literally just felt like I've been chatting to a friend, and I think that's really important, because I think we've both been really honest about our experiences, and I really do hope that this helps someone and gives them some hope if they are struggling right now.
Thank you so much, Emily, for allowing me the platform to talk about it quite freely, but also comfortably as well. And yeah, I must just touch on the element that you were talking about, was that things 100% do get better. And at the time, it feels like there's no way out. You don't even think about a way out. It's just, it's just your everyday, it's your norm. You're trying to get through the next breath, the next moment, the next second. Yeah. But like you said, Emily, just want to reiterate that 100% it does get better, and there is that element of freedom, no matter how far out of reach it feels at that time. Eventually it does come.
Thank you, Jess, so much. I honestly so grateful for you coming on here. Keep doing what you're doing, being an award-winning mental health writer. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't wait to keep watching your journey, and I also really can't wait to share this podcast. And thank you for joining at such a late time in the UK. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Emily, and I will speak to you soon.